So mind and soul. Let's get it going. There is an enormous capacity within each person that is mostly unused. To respond well to life in a happy and harmonious way requires intelligence. Right? However, intelligence is seldom abundant in any person, and whatever capacity for intelligence exists can always be improved. We can always get more intelligent, no matter how smart we think we are. So acquiring increasing intelligence requires an understanding and application of the fundamentals of esoteric psychology. That is what we teach in Gnosis, this esoteric psychology. Right? This is what we're talking about. So we're talking about intelligence, but more like real intelligence. We always think that we're all very intelligent, but it has to do with mundane things, mainly. In Gnosis, we know that the intelligence we're talking about is a higher type of intelligence, more spiritually oriented. Maybe we can dim the lights a little bit over there. Forgot about that. That help everybody. Okay. So now we'll get into a little bit of esoteric psychology. This should be a little bit of review. Probably. If I'm going too fast, you can let me know. We can slow down. Ask lots of questions. We can have lots of conversations. So, the structure of the human psyche consists of, and this is mainly review, the ego. Right? This is 97% of our consciousness. I think this is phase A, maybe phase B. The personality, which is the vehicle of manifestation for the egos. Or the being, not of the being, sorry. Should be. It's a vehicle for a manifestation of either the ego or the being. And then there's the essence, which is the 3% awakened consciousness. The ego and the essence are subject to the laws of return and recurrence, embodying many personalities over many different lives. So you guys kind of understand the relationship there already. The personality is just the vehicle for the ego, or if we incarnate our higher selves, will be the vehicle for the higher self. This is what we're talking about with esoteric psychology. Our mind is also part of our psyche. We're going to talk about the mind a bit. There are aspects of our mind that deal with thoughts, emotions, feelings, and instincts. These aspects of our mind manifest in the different centers of our body. This is going back to the 5 centers. The 5 centers of a human machine, and they are the intellectual, the motor, the emotional, the instinctive, and the sexual. This kind of stuff might be on a test, is why we're reiterating it. But I mean, it's just so you guys see it more than once. Also on the test, I know that when they ask you where they're located, the emotional center is located in the solar plexus. And that picture, I know I went with this picture. Sure. But that's from one of the texts, but it's because, you gotta get there's the five centers of the human machine, then there's the 3 brains, and everything's got different numbers and located in different places.
Where's that instinctive pointing to?
The instinctive is the base of the spine, coccyx.
And the motor?
The motor is the top vertebrae of the spine.
Do we have to know those specific things?
It's on the test. We're going to review the test before we have to take it and stuff.
I was going to say, what if we fail? I'm going to start all over again.
No, you can't. You're not going to fail. They're going to say, okay, Ed and Phil can't teach Phase C anymore. We got to find new instructors. Okay. So now we're going to look at 3 ways to react to situations. And this is the 3 ways Samael talks about, that we can react to any situation in life. The first one is the emotional, instinctive, impulsive reactions. Right? The second is intellectual reasoning. With any situation, we can intellectually reason it. And the third is awareness. And now we'll look at each one of these individually. So for the first thing, emotional reaction, this is the lowest form of reaction to the situations of life, right, as we can imagine. It's ego-driven, it's automatic, mechanical. It's a reaction from our subconscious that tends to lead to problems and regrets, right? So if someone insults us, we automatically get mad. If someone has more than us, we feel jealous. Violence begets violence, and hate begets hate. It's 100% ego controlled, basically. And you can see this in any situation. People can even use that to other people's advantage. If they want something from you, they could be really nice to you because they know that makes people happy, Or it's just when we see that kind of stuff. It's good to know about this because a lot of people don't know about this. And they think, okay, someone made fun of my glasses and now I'm going to fight them. And that's how most people live their life, And they think that, well, you can't make fun of me because that's how I roll, right? They don't even know that there's this other way. And most people don't even know that there's a thing called an ego. So once we start to see this, we can start to say, okay, wait a minute. If someone makes fun of me and I react mechanically, I'm just being an animal. Someone's ringing the bell and the dog's coming for his dinner. That's all it is right there. There's nothing higher going on. It's nothing more than a programmed machine. And with the egos living vicariously through us and controlling us the entire time. Second is intellectual reasoning, which we think is way better. But if we remember, the intellect is the only faculty that separates us from the animal. So it's basically, you can think of it in the range of faculties that you can acquire with clairvoyance and clairaudience and all this, the intellect is pretty low on the scale. And it can be very ego-driven also. So this way of reacting can be more fair than the emotional way, but still has problems. We still have a lot of problems with this one. Because everybody's still bound by their prejudices, their biasness, selfishness, and maliciousness. And intellectual reasoning can lead to more of this kind of thing. Because the state can be extremely ego-driven. It's mechanical and self-interested calculations. That's what makes it the massive problem with it. You can plan and devise ways to satisfy the ego. You know, deceitful, manipulative masterminding. This is all from intellectual reasoning. The ego will always justify and rationalize itself. That's the other problem with the intellect. The intellect can still be used by the ego, more so almost than the physical body, to always be justifying what you're doing. There's a mathematical equation from the Kabbalists which is pretty funny, that if pain is greater than pleasure, that equals no movement. And if pleasure is greater than pain, that equals movement. And they can judge everybody by that, they say. Even, tell you to look for that in your own life, and you'll see it come up. Because even when you think that you're doing something, like sacrificing right now, it's calculated. It's so you can get a benefit at the end, you know. Maybe you're going to go on a juice fast right now because you want to be beach body ready or something like that, you know. It's still sort of selfish in the end. But the intellectual reasoning is higher. It is higher than the emotional one, because now we're thinking about it. But from thinking about it is how you get some of the worst crimes, the conspiracy type stuff, and planning on how to actually get something from your neighbor, and by being nice to them, but to try to get something for yourself. However, that's more malicious than just getting mad at them for saying something mean to you.
Yes.
So now you're using higher faculties to find a way to get around being.
I don't know which one's worse, though. I mean, that could be a lot worse.
Yeah, this one can be much worse. Yeah.
Because I mean, even with the first, you don't have to fight someone. You maybe just blow up or something, but you're not malicious and calculating and figuring out how to make this person suffer, or how to try to get the most.
Exactly.
I think that's even worse.
Yeah, and it is, because we know that the toughest egos are in the intellectual realm. The hardest egos are the egos of the mind.
Yeah.
It's the hardest because, just like...
Because like it says, you just start justifying, rationalizing, oh, you know, I deserve this, and, blah, blah, blah.
Insanity.
And just to make yourself feel good. Well, you know, it's the ego, isn't it, that's telling you this, so you keep on doing it, because it's got control over you, right?
And you think that it's you, and it thinks it's you.
Well,
think
because you
one
identify with it.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's always a good marker to say, if I'm justifying something I'm doing, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Because you've never had to justify a good deed. You don't have to justify something that's right.
That's right, because you know inside it's right.
Yeah, because if you're like, well, I didn't pull over to the side of the road and help them, but it's because I'm so busy and I'm such an important guy, I have to go to the Gnostic Center and give a lecture or something. It's like, well, okay, now you're justifying why it's okay to be bad.
Yeah.
And that leads to a lot of problems. And a lot of justifying and rationalizing leads to some of the most problems.
Yeah.
If you see, like, I don't know, the craziest example obviously is the World War II and the Nazis, and they're justifying what they were doing because, you guys talking about that? Yeah, exactly. They justify what they're doing because they're doing it for the fatherland and for humanity in general, according to their own prejudices and biasness.
But that was just a lie they were telling themselves, so they could fulfill their deeper desires.
You can see this a lot with people.
Their prejudice.
Like I had a guy come in one time, not that I'm telling. So someone came in and said, I donated some clothes. I was donating some clothes. So I went to hand them to the guy. And he's like, oh, thanks, just throw them over there. And I'm like, no, these are really fancy clothes. You're not just going to throw them in the pile amongst the other clothes. I'm like, well, it almost seemed like, you're being more arrogant by donating these clothes and telling people how fancy they are than than if you just didn't donate them at all.
That's right.
I mean, so the ego finds ways to hide and hide and hide. And
Exactly.
every good deed, you gotta. That's why, like someone else says, you gotta be like a sentry, like a guardian in the time of war. You gotta be. You're in the battle. It's happening right now. Right now.
So when he donated those clothes, he said they were fancy clothes?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. They were just going to throw them amongst the other pile. We said, no, they got to go somewhere special. Take them right to your manager.
He said that. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh.
You take these right to the high-end Toronto thrift stores for sure. Yeah. So, and then the third way is awareness. With awareness, this is the highest way, and it is a little bit it's a little bit vague, but we can get the gist of it. This is the best form of reaction to any given situation in life. Awareness. Immediately comprehend truth above the mechanical emotions and intellectually calculating egos. This is understanding the truth above the intellect and above the ego. It's above the self-interested, erroneous state of the ego. This is the path of Gnosis, the revolution of the consciousness. So, I mean, to react with awareness, this is the best way to go do it, but I mean, it requires doing the work of the path to get to this state. It requires great conviction and great dedication. And you have to work in the three factors. This again is review. That will also be on the test, which are the birth of the solar bodies, the death of the ego, and the sacrifice for humanity. Through doing these things, you can come to awareness. But to just sit here and say, okay, well, I'm just going to start being aware, it doesn't really work like that, because you have to start eliminating ego before you can even become aware. It's a long
Self-observation.
Self-observation, exactly. Death in motion, and we'll talk about some other ways of doing that. And awareness is going to come up in my next lecture too, which will be in 2 weeks, when we talk about specifically meditating on the ego. But now we're going to talk a little bit about the mind. The mind. So first, when we say the mind, everyone thinks of the brain. When we talk about the mind, most people generally think of the brain. If we think the brain is the mind, we're quite mistaken. This is directly from Samael, all this stuff. The brain's job is to deliver us information that we can handle without overwhelming or confusing us. We perceive a massive amount of data at any given time, more data than we're even aware of, more data than we perceive our brain is taking in. The brain filters and funnels that data into small enough packages so that we can understand the world around us. The brain acts like a reduction valve, limiting and condensing the information gathered from our surroundings. It reduces it so we can understand it. In this way, the brain does more to limit our perception than it does to illuminate it, which is kind of a funny way. This I got from a Kabbalistic text, this part. But it makes sense if you think of what the brain's actually doing. It's a physical organ to try and make sense of the physical world. So, of course, it's blocking out a lot of stuff. We can't readily perceive ultraviolet or infrared, but we know it exists. We can only perceive, a certain bandwidth of sound, but we know that exists. And our brain, they say they can perceive all this information, but it kind of filters it down so we can understand the world around us. Because all of our brains are working the same way. We're all generally perceiving the world sort of the same way, with our own spins, our own spin on it too. But we'll get more into that. So the brain versus the mind, there is a difference. The brain is merely the instrument of the mind, not the mind itself. The brain's job is to receive and elaborate thoughts, but it's not the thought itself. The brain is the physical organ needed to manifest the mind in the physical world. The mind itself is subtle and can become independent from physical matter. The mind can travel through time and space independent of our brain. And we can see this, we can verify this for ourselves even a little bit if we get a little bit of consciousness, say a lucid dream. You ever had a lucid dream where you're having a dream and something seems odd and you're like, I think that's kind of weird. And then you say, wait a minute, I think it's weird that I'm thinking and my brain's over there in my bed. It's not attached to me right now, I'm in my astral body. So that's the idea of the mind. The mind is bigger than the brain. It funnels it down in the physical world, but you have thoughts and you experience things in the astral as well, even on the level of dreams. If you haven't verified it for yourself, I mean, that's the most important thing to do, but you don't have to take our words for it, but you'd have to assume, okay, then the astral body comes out at sleep, and in your dreams you're still perceiving things and you're still thinking, and all this stuff's still going on, but your physical brain is not part of this body. No. Physical brain is lying in bed with the etheric body, just having a nap, taking it easy, and living the good life, and you're out having these crazy adventures in the astral plane. Right? Talking to pink elephants and everything like Lee always talks about. So it's different that way. The mind. So the mind has many depths, regions, subconscious areas, nooks. Nevertheless, something valuable is in its center. Something very important is at the center of the mind. And that's the essence, the consciousness, what we're trying to liberate. It's at the center of the mind. We must comprehend all the mistaken functionings of the mind, such as our absurd ways of thinking, our wrong habits, our mechanical behaviors, our wrong views. Egos must be comprehended and eliminated from all the levels of the mind, conscious and subconscious. Samael talks about this concept a lot, about like the psychological moon, how the moon has a face we see, and the moon also has a dark side that we never see. The consciousness and the subconscious is just like that. So we start eliminating egos and think, okay, I'm going to start being, what can I do that's better? I don't know, I'm going to stop being so mean to my family. And you start there, but then that mean ego is still there. It's just manifesting now in another way, maybe to someone who's not in your family, right? Or something like that. So every ego has a dark side too that you don't even know exists yet. We have egos that we can't even comprehend yet. Even the good things of ourselves that we think are really good are also ego, which is a hard concept to understand. Some of our better principles think, we're all doing nice things here, and I bought my wife flowers and she's really happy and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, the ego works in such a hard way that everything in the end seems to mostly be about self-benefit. If you really look at it, and if you really start analyzing every situation, and it seems overwhelming, but that's why we start with the roots, right? The roots, we start with the obvious ones. We start with the ones like manifesting physical anger and this kind of thing. We start with the ones that we know, like, say, not to pick on smokers, but if you're smoking, say, I'm going to quit smoking. That's an external, representation of like an internal defect. It's basically like an ego, only it's externalized in smoking. So you say, get rid of that. And it'd be easier to quit doing that than it would be quit most of our egoic ways. But I mean, we work on it a little bit at a time. Does this make sense? Am I following? All right. I don't want to talk too fast. So I gave a lecture also on Face and it told me I'm talking too fast. You gotta slow down your talking. So I'm trying to talk slower. Only then will we know the reality of the being. Once we comprehend the ego on all our levels. So obviously that goes back to the same idea that if you want to get rid of, say, pride, then the easiest examples of it are the ones you start with first. I'm proud of the family I'm born into. Well, that has nothing to do with the essence. That's only the personality. So you start eliminating that pride, and then you'll find deeper and deeper and deeper manifestations of pride, and it goes deeper and deeper. And it takes a long time.
How about eliminating ego from the subconsciousness?
Yeah. Subconsciousness. Yeah.
Can you give an example?
Well, I mean, Samael talks about having 48 levels of the mind. And so that goes into the subconscious, and you have to go deeper and deeper to the subconscious stuff. Egos you didn't even know you had. Once you start eliminating egos and defects that you can observe and notice, you'll start getting better at self-observation, and you'll notice that egos or problems you think you didn't even know you had will start becoming more clear to you that there are these egos that exist within you, which are more from the subconscious level. And then through eliminating egos from the subconscious is how you become fully conscious, fully awakened, kind of thing. Because this goes like hand in hand with also, doing the working in alchemy and working with the energies. It all helps towards this kind of thing. That's why you need so much power for it. Because all these egos exist in the subconscious. The idea is these awakened masters, they don't have a subconscious. The subconsciousness. Everything's conscious, fully conscious. They don't have a subconscious because the 97% that's asleep has been awakened. They freed this consciousness.
So we're like prisoners.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like peeling an onion, right?
Yeah, I
You
was
take
gonna
the
say
outer
that.
layer,
Yeah,
and then you find another layer, and you get rid of that one, and then you see there's another layer.
Exactly.
And as you keep going,
yeah.
you might go through 20 or 50 layers before you get to the center.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a lot like that for sure. And the same thing is once you start eliminating ego and waking up consciousness, this consciousness will help you discover more. It'll be easier. It's not like we're always going to be at this level.
No.
It's hard. I don't even know what my mistakes are. We'll start with the obvious ones, start eliminating those ones, and then as they get eliminated and more essence becomes freed, you'll understand more. You'll have a better viewpoint, and you'll be able to see egos you didn't even know you had yet. And so your consciousness grows and grows that way. So right now, like the idea of tackling our subconscious seems impossible. It's subconscious. We are not conscious of it. We can't do it. You start with the conscious, And when you free that, you can start working at the subconscious level.
I've actually read
Oh.
I've actually read a technique for absorbing the subconscious, and essentially it's like the way it's described in this book I read was essentially you write down. It's like going through the process of observing how we judge others. So first you write down what is it that I don't like about this person, and then you erase the you and you turn it into a me, and then you get to really see what you don't like about yourself, and in the way that the reason we judge others is because ultimately, like, we're externalizing our egos into them when they may even not exhibit the things we're judging them for.
Absolutely. Something else talks about all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You only perceive egos in other people if they exist in yourself.
That's right.
It's not.
Because you identify with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that even the good egos we have to eliminate because we have also good egos. So, but a good technique would be the meditation. But I guess that we you talk about that in the elimination of the ego in depth.
Yeah.
Because meditation might help us to go into the subconscious and the deeper level, 49 levels of the subconscious. So I guess that.
Yeah, that's actually what the other lecture is on, meditating on the ego and how to precisely meditate on the ego.
Like what kind of good egos are you talking about?
Good ego would be, for instance, when we give like money to a drug dealer, a smoker of pot, or
a panhandler,
exactly, like a panhandler or a person.
That's a good ego.
That's a good ego.
Well, we perceive it as being good because we're giving.
But
in reality,
we're
all
only
you're doing is
feeding their
enabling.
addiction
Or
or
you give
their...
money to an alcoholic person, for instance, to go and buy more alcohol. So
so he can kill himself.
exactly.
Yeah.
And also because everything that we are right now isn't our highest being, right? We're ego. Unless we're manifesting our Father who's in secret in us right now, then we know that everything that we are is basically not opposite, but it's not that, so we know it can't be what has to stay. So even like the good parts of myself and stuff that I tend to like, I'd be like, well, it hasn't helped me reach my Father who's in secret, so it can't be part of him, therefore it's ego. It's not part of me if I want to associate myself with my higher self. It's just yes.
Well, what about a person, my friend just emailed me and she was watching, I think it was Dr. Oz, about this really obese woman, and my friend writes back, I hate fat people. And so...
That's prejudice, isn't it?
It's not a very nice
Is
thing
that
to
ego?
say. Yeah, for sure it is.
But it's not a
Prejudice.
reflection of her because, she's...
But she's prejudiced against these people,
yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's prejudice.
Well, I know that's ego, but I just want... Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it would be.
Yeah, but it's the same thing.
But
like,
I was trying to go with what Justin was saying, like, if I hate fat people, then you should...
that
turn
it's a
around.
reflection, yes.
Yeah. But if she's not fat, then how...
It would most likely be some kind of a manifestation of her wanting to be angry. And a lot of people you'll find will do this. They'll find ways to justify their anger. So if they do it in a good... Like if someone makes fun of my little brother, I'm going to beat them up. Well, is it because you really protective of your little brother, or is it because you want to find a way to manifest your anger?
Yeah.
It can be,
Yeah, and also, what was I going to say? Just lost my train of thought. But you're also, you want to, like when you're judging someone, okay, I hate fat people, look at how horrible they look. You're trying to make yourself feel better by putting somebody else down.
Sure.
That's not a way to make
Maybe it's
yourself feel
anger
better.
at their lifestyle, though. I think that's what really...
Or
Inflated
that's why
sense of
you're thinking
self-worth.
they're lazy
Pride.
and they're gluttonous or
eating,
whatever.
Yeah, like junk food.
Basically,
But
what it would
that's
be
but it's still a way of trying to make yourself feel above them, isn't it?
Yeah, and this person probably has other problems.
Yeah, that way.
That you don't know.
They don't have to focus on this person. Maybe this person's really mean, but she's skinny. She's like, I hate fat people because at least I'm not fat. But maybe it's a way of diverting your attention from focusing on your own problems.
Well,
That's
probably
right.
she thinks she's better because she thinks her lifestyle and diet are better than
That's
that
right.
fat woman.
Yeah.
And we all have it. We all have it inside of
Yeah.
us. It's in all of
So
us.
in that little situation, we can have several manifestations. Of
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
egos.
Pride.
Pride.
Yeah.
Pride, hate,
Yeah.
How
prejudice.
interesting.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, and when you really don't feel good about yourself right away, you try to put your anger out on somebody else.
Exactly,
Say if you don't feel good about what you did, or you feel that you could have done better, or if there's any regrets or whatever. I find sometimes, you know, it's easier to get get angry at somebody else, or
Yeah.
transpose that anger into them, you know.
Absolutely,
So, oh,
yes, for
look
sure.
at them, you know.
Yeah.
At least I'm not like that.
Yeah, so like, oh, I
Yeah.
might have been really mean to my girlfriend, but at least, you know, at least I'm not ugly or something, you know. It's
Yeah,
just
at least
like,
I don't beat the crap
it's
out
like
of her.
trying
so,
to
yeah.
find a way, like, to build themselves up still, so they don't
Yeah.
have to ever deal with your defects.
That's
The
right.
last thing a person wants to do is start realizing that they have problems.
Yes.
Everybody puts themselves on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And we all do it, and we all do it all the time. And we get to hear this different stuff, and we get to start applying it to our life, so we can see how much of a different world there is when you start realizing this stuff. But in reality, most people are always putting themselves on a pedestal, and they always want to protect themselves and their feelings. They're really at the whim of the world around them. They're at the whim. It's like, oh,
Yes.
God, please don't say something bad to me. Please don't judge me. Please don't say that I'm not good at this, you know. And once you start working on the ego in that, you can start to rise above that a little bit. And you'll start to realize that the same part that gets mad when someone insults you is the exact same ego that gets really happy when someone just praises you for no reason.
Yes, just
It's the
flip
same
side.
thing. You're still reacting pretty much spontaneously to somebody else's external input.
Yeah.
They say, you know, I don't like your glasses, you suck. Oh, man, I'm mad at you. I love your glasses. Oh, thanks, man. We're best friends. Let me buy you a drink, you know? It's the exact same thing, but it's flip side of the coin.
That's right.
So, and it's easier to start with the negative ones because it's easier to wrap our heads around that.
Right, right.
But it's harder once we start saying, okay, some of the good stuff, is it good? Or am I trying to build myself? Why am I doing these things exactly?
Yeah,
Is it-
or why do you let others control whether you're going to be happy or not, you
Exactly.
know?
Yeah.
And that's what Lee used to say, you know, if you allow a circumstance and other people, if you know, make you happy, then think of all the times when you're not happy.
Yeah.
Because all the other times then you're not happy.
Yeah. Yeah, it defines for you exactly what happiness is, and then most of
Yes.
the times you're not in that.
Yeah.
So you basically just define what unhappiness is, and you
Exactly.
put yourself in that more times than you're in happiness.
That's right.
That is true. That's why that's the lecture about the pendulum.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
pendulum in the shadow.
Trying to
Yeah,
stay in
yeah,
the
yeah.
center. Yeah. It's a really good lecture.
Mhm.
That was good.
A lot of that stuff comes up when we get into more of the psychological stuff, like the way that Facey is going to be going now, into more of the psychological. So we're going to talk about the mind as it grows a little bit. So first, the young mind, like in the child and the baby, very flexible. They're very alert. They're very inquisitive, right? The child always asks why. They always want to know more. They perceive details that adults don't appreciate. You can see that working with children. If you had children or seeing like little kids and everything, it always seems like they're tapped in a little bit more. You know, it seems like the baby's crying in his crib, like, why is he crying? Then he's happy all of a sudden. It's like, what's going on with these kids? But their minds are more flexible. They're really open. They're like perceiving everything, and they're not judgmental. They haven't increased all this ego yet, and they haven't been bound, you know, by experience and pain and suffering. So they're really wide open minds, you know. And I seen this one documentary. It was out of body experiences, and this Russian guy died, went out of his body, and then he was in a hospital. And then the babies were coming in. This baby's crying. It was like asking the baby, "Why are you crying?" He's got a broken hip, but he can talk to all these people in the astral. And then the guy ended up getting resuscitated and came back and went in there and said the baby's got a broken hip. And then they looked and he did have a broken hip. They didn't understand why this baby was crying. So I mean, it's a documentary, but it's just one example that if you took that one at face value, you could see that these children are open and alert and communicating with the astral plane, because they basically just came from there,
Yes.
or from the spiritual realms, right?
That's right.
They basically just came from unbornness into being born in the physical. So they're a little more open that way. And this is why we always know as kids are always like, why? They want to know everything. Why? We gotta ask questions. We gotta understand. We want to know. And they always come up with different reasons. Like you tell them it's like this. And then, well, why is it like that? Maybe it's like this. And kids are good at doing that. Now, as we grow older, we all know the story changes. The flexible mind begins little by little to become more rigid and crystallizing, becoming more stone-like. We start to get more fixed in our ways. We accumulate more and more eyes, or the eyes that we accumulated in past lives that start to manifest more and more. We get more bad habits and prejudices. And you can see this happening. And then, once you become a teenager, you know everything already now. And then they're totally different. And then you get to the old mind. And that's fixed, stone-like, and unchanged. Generally, this is wide brush stuff. So the old mind becomes totally petrified within the prejudices, fixed ideas, wrong views of the individual. If you spend a lot of time, you're alert, you start getting prejudices and experiences, and you say, this is the way the world is, then you stick to that. Tend to. This is in general. People tend to. Obviously, when you're on the spiritual path and you're looking at your psychology and your psyche and stuff, it's a little more than just, say, most of humanity that just goes through without even knowing about the ego or this kind of thing. But you can see that with older people who don't like the music that the kids are playing and all this kind of stuff, and don't want to learn the computers and all this kind of thing. It kind of shows like just an outward, superficial state of what the mind is like. They've been stuck in their ways, and they're very unchanging. It is unfortunate that a person's mind becomes petrified like stone over time. The mind of every person becomes bottled or trapped in the prison of the past. We're always in the past, daydreaming of the past, remembering the past, dreaming of the future, very rarely in the present. The mind becomes trapped in many prisons: jealousy, hatred, personal attachments, personal suffering, family problems, desires for wealth and social status. People always take pleasure in bottling the mind. That's the funny part about it too. Like, we have all these problems, but we're addicted to it too. We're addicted to it and we love it because we're so identified with the ego that we think it's us. So we'll always be looking for these problems, and people, you probably know people, you get together and talk, and everybody wants to take a turn complaining about how bad their life is, and I got this problem, oh yeah, well I got this problem. People seem kind of just to relish in it, and they just kind of exacerbate the whole situation kind of thing. But it's true. The mind's bottled in these prisons, these egos, and people tend to be really attached to them. Like family problems and stuff, that can really affect people. They can really carry that with them to the point where they think that's like the entirety of their being. It's like, oh, no one talked to me. I got beat as a kid or something. I don't know. I'm just snowballing here. But people can really attach that and identify that with who they are, as opposed to some of the higher stuff we've been talking about. The idea of this essence and stuff. So it's rare are those who resolve to shatter to pieces the bottle. So that's some Samael, how he talks, but what he's saying is people who start eliminating the ego and start freeing the mind. It's very rare. It's very rare. It's so rare because it's difficult and it's a lot of personal responsibility. When you have these kind of problems, you can basically pass the buck. Now, everything that's wrong with your life came from something over here. It wasn't your fault. It was your childhood and all this. And so the way I am is just because this is how I got raised, and this is what they showed me, and my parents are like this to me, so I'm going to be like this to my kids and everything like that. But when you start saying, okay, I want to rise above that, it becomes very difficult. Then you have to realize that you're the only one in control of your life. You're the only one in control of your problems. Any problem from the past that's affecting you right now is because your mind is in the past, dwelling on it, carrying that with you like baggage. And that when we start to realize this, we realize, oh, there's a great amount of work that has to be done here, and the only one that can do it is me. It comes to the point, too, where I could read all the books on Samael on board and read everything that was ever written in occult literature, but I have to do it. It starts with me. I have to put it into practice. Nobody's going to practice it for me. That's the fundamental difference between Gnostic Christianity and the fundamental Christianity, the idea that someone died for your sins, and now it's okay, you got the you get the free ride. You say you died. Okay, I was with Jesus. Okay, you're in. Like Gnostic Christianity is like, no, he showed you the way. He was this awakened master that gave you this path. You have to walk it. You have to walk it. It's up to us. So, I mean, I like that, but it's heavy. But it's good to know. It's also good to know that you're not in the control of the situations around you. That you're the one in charge. So now we're going to talk about the three minds, because there's always 3 somethings, 5 somethings, or 7 somethings. This is the 3 minds. That was a joke, sorry. But the first one we're going to talk about is called the sensual mind. Then there's the intermediate mind, and finally the inner mind. These are different aspects, different levels, basically, of the mind. So the sensual mind. The sensual mind is based solely on the information and impressions that are experienced through the 5 senses. And that's why it's sensual. There's nothing romantic going on there. The The sensual mind is completely subjective and limited by the senses. This mind only operates with what it receives from the five senses. It cannot know truth or illumination. If the sensual mind could lead to illumination, then the general mass of humanity would be illuminated. This, we know, is not the case. Because we're mostly bottled up in our sensual mind, operating off our senses, and that's what forms reality for us. Right? The only source of nourishment is brought by the external sensory perceptions. So this mind is basically the lowest form of mind. Everything you see, hear, touch, taste, or smell, this is what it views as reality. Nothing above or beyond that. Second one is the intermediate mind. Religious beliefs are found within the intermediate or middle mind. These beliefs are above and beyond the simple realm of the five senses, obviously, when we start talking about God and the idea of immortality and life and death and heaven and hell. The middle mind works with data brought by religions, superstitions, and philosophies. So the middle mind works with all these theories or different schools and ideas, basically. So ideals, morals, ethics, dogma, perceptions of the deity, all this kind of stuff is found within the intermediate mind. Although the intermediate mind is nourished by religious views, it is still very subjective and differs greatly depending on each individual. Right? Because everybody's intermediate mind would be totally different based on your upbringing and your geography, where you're born, what religion you're born into. Like,
That's right.
Main differences between, say, Muslims and Jews and Christians is all in here. And if they say, no, this is the truth because I read it and I found it in these books, then, it's kind of driving a wedge in between people still. It's not really leading to truth. It's higher than the sensual mind because now we're starting to admit or contemplate things that are bigger than ourselves or ideas that are more abstract than the physical world. But still, it's very subjective. Very subjective. And then there's the inner mind. The inner mind works with information brought by the superlative consciousness of the being. So it's direct connection to the being. Only with the inner mind can we know truth. Truth is beyond sensorial perceptions and dogmatic religious beliefs. Truth is not something we touch, taste, and it is not something we read about or are taught. The big difference is truth is only known through experience. And that's what makes it true. And only in the inner mind do you experience it. That's a big difference between the inner mind and the intermediate. Intermediate mind, we weren't experiencing anything for ourselves. We were just reading it, or our church told us this, or my family raised me this way. So it was these beliefs that were above the senses, but it wasn't based on truth. The inner mind bases it on experience, direct experience of truth. With the inner mind, we can know about life and death, karma, return, recurrence. We can know about all of this, and we can know it without saying, well, I read it in this book, and I think that's true. That'd be the intermediate mind. Knowing it, experiencing it, saying, maybe experiencing the Akashic records, then you say, I know, I was there, I experienced it. Maybe I can't experience it for you, but if you experience it, you would know too, kind of thing. And people know other stuff that people... So with the inner mind, we can truly know objective reality. And that's the big difference between objective and subjective reality, right? Objective reality is truth. Subjective reality is what we perceive every day, subjected through our senses. And there is no religion higher than truth. Is also that's a saying by the Theosophist, Helena Blavatsky. But there is no religion higher than truth is a beautiful saying because it's true. I think. you wouldn't it's a tricky word, I know. But, yeah. But, so like, you wouldn't have the arguments between the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims and the Hindus if they all experienced the truth and they all were tapped into the same truth. Because, right, truth can't be subjective. We all say, I have a personal truth, and Justin has his personal truths. Well, then they're not truths, or only one of them's true and one of them's wrong. Because by the nature of the term, truth isn't subjective. You can't say, I think this is true and I think that is true. That's more of like a belief. It's not truth. But if you experience truth, you'll know it's higher than religion and dogma because it's the ultimate. It's true. It's true. Now, when we start talking about this kind of stuff, it's abstract a little bit for sure.
So belief is a subjective truth?
We're gonna talk about belief and faith too and see what they are too. But yeah, exactly. Beliefs, I believe beliefs can be good if you use them as a starting point for your investigations.
Yeah.
Open-minded, say, okay, it'd be like the idea, like saying if I believe that all roses are red, because I've never seen a white one. Okay, I believe that. I better go check out some fields and make sure that I'm right. Then you go and you find a white one. Oh man, I was wrong. There's white ones too. See, well, that belief drove me to go find out the truth. So that's okay. But if you're like, I don't know, like the Pope or something, like all roses are red. Yeah, I saw a white one. Off with his head. Get him in there. Don't let him tell anybody there's a white one out there. You know. So yeah, that's the difference. That's the big difference there. Not to pick on the Pope or anything. So this is the path to develop the inner mind. So we're going to talk about how we can develop the inner mind, because we know a little bit what the inner mind is now.
Oh, there's one.
Yeah, that's me. That's me right there. Self-portrait. But we know that the inner mind is tapped in directly to the being, and it's good to say that, but I mean, it is still pretty abstract, because unless you're there, you don't know, and I don't know. But Samael tells us a lot of stuff. So we'll get into subjective reasoning first. The intellect is completely subjective. Our intellect is 100% subjective. We've been talking about this. It demands proofs, demonstrations, and examples when speaking of karma, divine law, reincarnation, etc. They want concrete physical proof of these spiritual principles. That's the intellect. The intellect will never understand these principles because it is caged up within the senses. And truth, as we'll see, exists outside of the senses, right? That's what makes it objective. The intellect is subjective because it is limited by the particular sensorial perceptions of the individual to interpret and understand reality. So that was a mouthful he gave us there, but it's basically, the intellect is subjective because it's subjected to our five senses. It's contained within our five senses. And we know for a fact that there's so much more to the world than where our five senses shows us. And we know this by instruments we make that can adapt to our five senses, like, you know, infrared lights, so we can see the infrared, or the infrared goggles and that, so we know infrared's out there, and all this kind of stuff. But it's still subjective because we have to make it fit our eyes. But we'll talk a bit about it. So spiritual facts cannot be comprehended by the intellect because these facts are universal truths that exist beyond the subjective reasoning of the five senses. So basically reiterated that again. But it's kind of a weird thing to say, so we got to try and understand it a bit better. The intellect alone is an unrefined and elementary faculty, right? Separates us from animals, like the first step away from being an animal, basically. Like we mentioned that. The truth is objective and cannot be limited by the senses. So, basically, another reiteration of the same thing, but I found a diagram that kind of explains it maybe a little easier. So we look at this, you know, as objective reality or truth. This is truth. A really abstract thing, that's truth. This is the individual. This is you. A box closed off from the truth with just 5 slits on it. These 5 slits letting in truth are touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. And we know each one of these is limited even. Like we know sight, if you study the electromagnetic spectrum, we only see this much of it, right? Electromagnetic that we can see. Sound is the same way. Smell, we have a range. We know that more exists than that. But we only get a sample of this, a sample of that, a sample of that, a little bit of that, and just a little bit of that. And based on that, you think we could find reality? Well, maybe a part of it? Nope, because then it gets processed through the ego. So now we're getting all this. This is what's coming from the external world. Out here, the true world. This is what's coming in, getting processed through the mainframe computer of the ego. So based on all this, it'll take it and do what it wants with it, basically. You can see, basically, you know the saying, you only see what you want to see and that kind of thing. So, I mean, the ego will put a spin on your 5 senses. So our 5 senses are never even that objective. They're all really subjective to first of all, what they're limited to in the range, like of the taste buds we have. There's more tastes out there, we just don't have taste buds formed. You know, we can see more colors out there, but we don't have our eye doesn't have the bandwidth for it, basically. And then within that ego, there's reality. There's our reality, subjective reality. This is what we understand as the world. Everything we understand about the world is understood inside of here. So in reality, we're cut off from the truth. We only get these 5 little bits of truth that get processed through here, and then that gives us our reality. So it's funny to think of it that way a little bit, but you know, you can kind of see how it is true that way. Like, so I'm experiencing something through my 5 openings, and Justin through his, and and everyone through their own, and everything we're experiencing right now is slightly different. Can you imagine stepping into someone's head right now and seeing what they see or see how they see it? You know it's going to be a universe of difference based on their egos and the way they see things and what they like and don't like. That's where the ego comes into it. But this is basically the diagram that shows the difference between subjective reality and objective truth. To try and get there. That's more like the Ein Sof type stuff we were talking about in the Kabbalah lectures. So let's go on from there. So we've got imagination. Imagination is a cognitive faculty that exists beyond the intellect. It's above and beyond the intellect. A great artist must first imagine his masterpiece before he puts brush to canvas. There are two types of imagination. I mean, we can probably agree with this. An architect, before they want to build a building, they have to imagine what it's going to look like and place everything, and then they do it. The two types of imagination one is mechanical imagination. This is harmful to the consciousness. This is fantasy, daydreaming, formed by memory. This is what we mostly use our imaginations for. Really mechanical, just we're always in the past, remembering things or fantasizing about the future, and that's like the ego-driven imagination. The ego's taking your imagination for a ride. So everything that you're thinking, you're imagining, it's just so the ego can live out its fantasies, basically. The second kind is called conscious imagination. And thanks to this powerful faculty, images are formed in the perceptive center of the being. Perceptive center of the being. So we'll talk about this a little bit, what conscious imagination means. So developing conscious imagination raises us above the subjective reasoning of the sensorial mind. It is not possible to ascend the path if we remain bottled up within the sensorial perceptions of the intellect. So we have to start imagining these things beyond our five senses and that kind of thing. To ascend the path of initiation, three things are needed. Samael stresses this in many of his books. They're imagination, inspiration, and intuition, and one leads to the next. Developing these faculties, one after the other, leads to the development of the inner mind. That inner mind we're talking about is linked directly to the being. Basically, conscious imagination is the idea of, we'll talk about it more specifically in the meditating on the ego, but it's like, say when we're doing our meditation here, and we're imagining breathing in the light, and we're really focusing our imagination. We're imagining seeing this temple. We're imagining that we can see our Divine Mother, and we're really imagining this stuff, and really focusing on imagining this. It's not just like, okay, let's meditate, and all these pictures randomly from your day comes by, and you're thinking about, what kind of cardigan sweater you're going to wear tomorrow or something. I don't know. But, so, I mean, this is like really focusing the imagination. It's using it for a tool to lead to ascending the path, basically. You have to imagine it first before you can even experience it. Kind of things you have to start, opening up the doors of perception to it. So you have to start saying, okay, well, maybe objective reality exists outside of me, and inside of me it doesn't really exist. So what would that be like? What would that actually be like here? Or they explain what the mental realm is like, and let's try to imagine what that would be like. Most specifically, it's used in the next meditation that we're going to talk about in the next lecture, when we, imagine the ego, we see the ego, then we imagine putting it in a courtroom, and we're judging it, and then the Divine Mother cuts its head off and that kind of thing. We're going to get into that stuff. But that's really using conscious imagination, because you're using your imagination now as a tool for a higher purpose. And you're using it, it's not using you, like how it is most of the time. Now we'll talk about the inner mind. Faith versus belief. And they're very different in Gnosis. Samael stresses it. By developing the inner mind, we experience reality and truth directly. We've said that. Through direct experience, authentic faith is born within us. Experience gives us faith. And the difference between faith and belief is, unfortunately in this day and age, belief is often confused with faith, or they're used interchangeably as the same thing almost. I believe in this, I have faith in this. But faith is the direct perception of what is real, above and beyond the five senses, the body and the intellect. And it's a faculty of the inner mind. Through direct experience of the inner mind, you gain faith. Faith is like linked to truth. You have faith in this because you've experienced it. Belief is subjected to the inner prejudices, biases, upbringing, personality of each individual. And it's a faculty of the middle mind, the intermediate mind that we were talking about. So belief is like how we were talking about people's religious beliefs. And I'm not going to talk to him because he doesn't believe what I believe and this kind of thing. I have these beliefs that I assume are right. But if you experience the truth directly, then you have the faith. I have faith that the astral plane is real because I've had an astral experience. It's not like the flip side of that would be I believe the astral plane is real because they talk about it at the Gnostic group and they don't seem to be lying unless they're all hallucinating, you know. So that's the flip side. That's how you use those two different terms. What else we got? Faith is true wisdom, never vain belief. Belief is generally vain. Generally because people cling to it like it's truth even though it's not. And that's one of the big problems that we see, right? We can see how, yes, my name is.
Well, you finish your thought first.
Just that we can see how belief is bad go.
Oh, okay. I don't know if they could end of that sentence.
Yeah.
So the idea being expressed right here is that because obviously in our society we look at belief, or some of us look at as a negative thing that hinders the mind.
Sure.
But the idea being discussed here is that belief rather is a tool to create faith. Is that essentially the idea?
It definitely can be and should be. I think it definitely should be. Most of the times people use this and stay there. I believe this and that, therefore it's true. But like we said, if you have a belief, like talking about the roses, and then you said if you use it to go find out the truth about that, then it leads to faith. Then it's a good step. It's like a stepping stone from the middle mind to the inner mind, basically. But a lot of people get stuck right there. They just stay there. A lot of people are just in the sensorial mind, you know, atheists and that. What I see is what is true. You know, show me it, I'll believe it.
Yeah, I recall an anecdote from the master when a disciple asked him, "Master, do you believe in God?" And he said, "No, I don't, because I know it."
Yeah.
So it's he was just trying to state that belief is different from faith, right?
Faith, yeah.
Because it has, when one incarnates the divine principles, we have experienced the real truth, so we don't need to believe.
No, you don't need to
Because
believe.
we know.
Experience. You have
Because
faith.
we know.
Exactly.
So it's different.
It's only difficult in our minds mainly because in the Western society and everything now, these words have become synonymous in the way it's used. We don't think there's a difference, but there is a total difference. And once you differentiate these words, you can now see that there are these different levels that do exist. Most people think that their belief is truth. And you said, well, your truth can't be true and his truth be true at the same time because they're different. So one of them's not true. Everyone says, oh, it's his. Mine's true. But they realize that if you got to the level of the inner mind, he wouldn't believe something and he wouldn't believe something. They both have faith because they both know. They both experience it for what it is, beyond the subjective realm of the ego, right? Which really gives us this belief. But belief, being that said, belief can be good as long as we use it in the right way. Like, for example, when I first started coming out here, they told me a lot of stuff. And I was like, wow, I don't know. They told me some stuff, and they told me if I do this, it'll work. So I'm going to believe them. So I did that. And then it worked. And then I thought, okay, now I don't have to believe them anymore on that part because it worked. However small it might be, then I, in my mind, what kept me going is, they told me this. If I do this, this will happen. I believed them. I did that. That did happen. So the other stuff, I can sort of, assume that they're doing the same thing. They're not lying to me. I just have to experience it for myself to really know. So that's the big difference between faith and belief. The idea is we have to free our mind. We need to liberate the mind. Unfortunately, people adore their slavery. Someone else says this a lot. They adore it. We don't think we do, but we're obsessed with ourselves and all the pain that we get, and even the smallest amount of things that goes wrong, we'll always blow it out of proportion. Because why? Because why has it got to happen to me? It's like we love ourselves so much. Just the way it is. It is rare to find a person who does not have their mind bottled up in these egos. We must comprehend the mind on all its many levels. We have to eliminate the psychological aggregates, right, the egos. We have to quiet and calm the mind. We must make the mind become receptive and passive so that it may be used as an instrument of the being, not of the ego. Only this way can we begin to incarnate that which is called soul. So, a lot of stuff there. It's kind of important too to start to understand the idea that the mind and the ego are also different things, but it is hard to understand a little bit. The way I try to think of it is there's always actors fighting over the stage or who's going to be in the spotlight, and the mind is that stage. It's that stage. It's the place that all this can happen. It can also be the place where the being can manifest through. So the mind itself isn't a negative thing, but we use it for the egos. We use it for the, yes?
When you said the inner mind, the middle mind, are there more?
There was just the inner mind, the middle mind, and then the first one, which was the sensual mind. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Those are the three main ones that he talks about. But, yeah. So we also have impressions in our mind too, and we'll have lectures on the impressions of the mind. But it's important that we start to receive these impressions correctly also. So not only do we have to eliminate egos, we have to start understanding and receiving impressions correctly. So it'll be another level to the whole confusing thing, but I know you guys can get it because you're all smart. Yeah. Now we're going to go into the human soul. Yes?
You're feeding our ego.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, you can have a boost every here and there. Along with a little inspiration.
I believe it.
There you go.
Oh no, I have faith.
It was faith, yeah. See, it's working. It's working. Nice. So we'll talk a little bit about the soul now. We've talked about it before, like on the Kabbalistic tree. We understand the idea of the human soul, the divine soul, and the intimacy. These are all. This is a little bit more general, but a little more informative. So, in most religions and philosophical traditions, the soul is thought to be the self-aware essence unique to each particular living being. Right? The self-aware part of every person is thought to be the soul in most traditions. Thus, the soul is the true basis of the living being. The soul is generally thought to be immortal and to exist prior to and after the duration of the living being's physical life. In most systems, this is what we find. A lot of similarities. The soul is before the physical birth and exists after the physical death. The soul is represented in this way within many different cultures. We're going to look briefly at some of them. Like in Hinduism, according to the Bhagavad Gita, the soul is referred to as Purusha. The Purusha is a part of God. It is never born and it never dies. So now this one, we're talking about a higher level of the soul that we might call the intimus or the divine soul. It is unchanging, indestructible, and immortal. All living beings possess this Purusha. This is just the basic idea of soul in Hinduism. Real basic. Plato had a lot of big thoughts on this stuff. So Plato, based on the words of his teacher Socrates, considered the soul to be the essence of the individual person also. The very essence. He considered this essence to be the incorporeal, eternal occupant of our being. So the being was something that would be born, pass away, return to the dust, but the thing that's thinking and seeing and acting through this is this soul. As bodies die, the soul is continually reborn in subsequent bodies. So a lot of this seems really familiar to stuff we've heard in Gnosis because it's kind of like a universal wisdom. It's found in a lot of areas. Valentinus, the Gnostic Christian. According to the spiritual psychology of the Gnostic Christian Valentinus, the human being is a threefold being. There's the body, which he called soma or heil, the soul, which he called the psyche, and the spirit, which is called the pneuma. All humans possess semi-dormant spiritual seeds, which he called the sperma pneumaticon. This seed, in the developed Gnostic, can unite with the spirit. So this is more like the idea that we come across in Gnostics and in Gnosis here, that we have the essence is the seed of the soul that we have to develop to become in union with the spirit or the soul. Sometimes these words are interchangeable too, spirit and soul, in a lot of different traditions. I found from studying a lot of different traditions, it's mostly semantics that you got to deal with. What one tradition is calling the ego, the other tradition is calling the being, and they say this one's wrong because they worship the ego. Wait, no, they're calling their intimus the ego. So it's confusing that way, but a lot of cultures have a lot of similarities. When you talk about Gnosticism with esoteric Hinduism and Kabbalism and the Sufis, is very similar stuff that they point to. So this idea of the spiritual seed being one of them. Valentinus's concept of the spiritual seed is identical with that of other cultures. It's called Shespa in Tibetan Buddhism. Same kind of idea that we have this spark that has to be, Jiva and Vedanta. Vedanta is being like a offshoot kind of sect of Hinduism that deals with a very specific section of the Vedas called the Upanishads. These Vedas are massive, and they have all these different groups of different, like, kind of worship different parts. Ru in Sufism. The Sufis are like the mystical Islamic, esoteric Islam. That's the Sufis. The whirling dervishes. That's the Sufis. Soul spark in other cultures. They have it in Kabbalah too, where they talk about the raising of the sparks. Everybody has to raise the sparks back up to recreate the original atom, kind of thing. So it's kind of universal across the board. We see this concept coming up again and again, which is interesting to notice. It's not just in this basin we hear about this kind of stuff, but it makes more sense down here. So these cultures all agree that the human being has within a spiritual spark or seed that must be developed in order to reach illumination or unity with the soul or spirit, in whichever way they call it in their particular group. But the idea is that we have a seed of that. We have to develop it. It's not the full-blown thing yet. So in Gnostic Christianity, this I believe is from this isn't from the Gnostic Gospel, from the, I don't know what you call them, canonical text, the regular Gospels. But Jesus says to his disciples, "In your patience possess ye your souls." This is a quote from Jesus. "In your patience possess ye your souls." This indicates to us that our souls are a part of our being that we do not yet possess. So the idea that we don't possess our souls yet. We have this seed that we talked about, but that's not the soul. That's the essence. That's what we need to develop. And the soul, from all the massive Kabbalah stuff we've been doing, we know that the soul, it's a conjunction of laws, principles, virtues, and powers. It's like the higher aspects of ourselves, obviously. We're nothing like our soul because we're ego. Each person has a divine, immortal soul, but they don't possess it yet. Everybody has a soul right now that we don't yet possess, but it exists. We do not have it incarnated, because we haven't built the vehicles to possess it. People have an essence, the psychic material needed to crystallize the soul, but they do not yet have a soul. So we have the essence, and we see that this is the material we need to create the soul, but we don't have the soul yet. The soul exists above and beyond us. If we do not yet possess our soul, is it possible to lose it? Yes, it is possible to lose your soul. I didn't mean to be so excited there with the exclamation mark. It's kind of weird. Samael talks about those that enter the infernal worlds lose their soul. Once you enter the infernal worlds, you're detached from your soul. Your divine mother becomes the one who starts persecuting you for all the things you've done wrong, and your soul doesn't go anywhere near them. And how sad it is to lose that treasure. This is what Dante's Inferno, the 9 spheres of hell. I don't think we've talked about it. I don't know if you've had a lecture on that. Have you had a lecture on that? Good. So you guys all know that the Tree of Life, the upside down 9 spheres, is those. That's what I thought. That's why I didn't add that in the other stuff. But yeah. So the idea is also that it's not eternal, like how most fundamental Christians view hell is a place of forever suffering. But we understand it's a place of purification where we can return back. So you lose your soul, but you lose it for a time, right? You lose it. Basically, you lose it because you lose the possibility of gaining it. We don't have it right now, but we have the possibility of gaining it through the human form. Through awakening the essence, right? And creating these vehicles, we can incarnate our soul. It's only on the human level that you can do that. And then if 108 lives go by, you didn't do it, you go back down around. You can't incarnate the soul as an animal or as a plant or as a rock. And then infernal regions, then back up around, back to human, and then you have another chance. And then if all that, if you never do it, then at the end of the second death, you go back to the source as a small spark. So you do return to the source, he teaches, but it's almost like an unconscious return. It's really mechanical. The idea of why hell is so hard for most people to understand, like, why are we being punished? It's like, you're not really being punished. You're being cleansed of your ego that you're identifying with. And because you're identified with the ego and you think the ego is you, that ego is being ripped away from you, kind of cleansed and purified. You feel like it's a part of you that's being tortured. Rudolf Steiner writes a lot about that. So if you have,
Who writes about that?
Rudolf Steiner is another kind of esoterist guy. But he writes, if you're really gluttonous, the reason why it's like hell is because now you use the physical organism to supply you with happiness. You're eating all this food, and now you don't have a physical body, and you desire this food, and you don't have the instrument to attain it. You can't attain it. And Samael talks about it in more depth with the desires and the egos. All these egos that are alive right now, they're not going to return to the source, right? Because the egos aren't part of the spark. They're basically getting washed off of the kernel of soul spark. But if you identify with them, it feels like you're being punished, or you're being tortured. And that's just a picture from Dante's Inferno, which you guys have talked about already, which is a really interesting and really interesting work. Dante Alighiero being a master is what Wolfgang Lee and Master Samael said. So it's really interesting to read the work from that perspective. Another one is if you ever read the works of William Blake. That guy was tapped in too. So there's a lot of guys or people in general through the long course of history. You find these flashes of light everywhere. You can put them together and the picture makes sense. But here's Jesus being tempted by Satan. The Divine Master Jesus quotes, "For what is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul?" He also says, "What shall a man give in exchange for his own soul?" The idea is there's nothing here that's worth your divine soul. And the idea is that we cling to the physical world so much that we don't even want to work on the path, and that's giving up our soul for the physical world. It's basically doing this picture. We want the kingdom. Kingdom being the physical world. We're so attached and in love with the physical world, and our egos love it so much that we don't even want to do the work, and only through doing the work can you incarnate the soul. So he's saying, what does a man profit? A rich king, you get everything you want in this world, and you're still going to have to, pay the piper. You're still going to die. It's still going to come. Still going to be leveled by death, and then you're going to have to deal with it then. So, these quotes kind of show us the soul is something above and beyond us right now. How can one attain their soul? Let's get a little happier, see what we can do about this. Not be so glum. This is done by disintegrating our defects, right? By eliminating the psychological aggregates, by destroying the egos, through self-awareness, self-observation, self-remembering, death and motion, meditation, and alchemy to build the solar bodies. These terms I put on again to make sure everybody remembers them. And you guys all remember what each one of these are, maybe. If not, we can talk about them a bit. These three kind of are like a step one onto the other, right? Self-awareness is like if you're wrapped in your mind, you're thinking, just ground yourself with your senses first, breathe. And then self-observation is watching yourself, watching the egos. Self-remembering is the hardest one, but it's like the idea of constantly remembering that you have a father is in secret, you have a divine mother, you have this divine job that you're in charge of, that you're supposed to be doing, which is easier when we're here and harder when we're out there, It's harder. It's easy to get wrapped up with swinging wrenches and being a mechanic and just living that lifestyle and then coming here and be like, oh yeah, right, there's stuff I'm supposed to be doing, right? Death in motion is when you attack an ego head on as soon as you realize it pops up. Justin made fun of my glasses. I'm like, what? That's an ego. So just be cool, man. Be cool. Then you pray to your divine mother right at that point. Say, take this ego from me. Please destroy this ego. That's the idea of death in motion. Kind of attacking it head on. Self-observation is watching yourself throughout the whole day. And then in meditation, what we're going to talk about in the other lecture is bringing those observations to a meditation and then reflecting upon them deeply and trying to understand where this ego came from, what fed it, what caused it to come out, what effects did it have on the surroundings, and we're going to get into all that stuff in the next lecture. So also, the soul and the ego are like oil and water. They do not mix, right? You can't really incarnate soul with ego. They're the opposites. He that wants to possess a soul will have to eliminate the undesirable psychic aggregates that we all carry inside of us. We all have this. If you want to incarnate your soul, you have to do the psychological work. A lot of times we get caught up a lot on the alchemical work, and the idea, well, if I don't have a partner right now, then what's the point of even doing this? It all starts with the psychological work, and there's so much psychological work to do. We have to start realizing and looking at our defects and understanding them. Samael even talks about meditating on the egos for 5 years, up to 5 years, and on certain egos. And it's a long work. It's a long, long work, and it's some of the most important thing. Because you could, theoretically, have a partner and be practicing alchemy and building these bodies, and not eliminating ego, and then basically the ego can have these higher bodies to use, which can up to a certain point can happen. And they call them Hannes Musens, these double soul. Remember we talked about Andremelech, that one guy, there's a good Andremelech and the bad one. It was hard to understand why there was that. It's because they built these bodies up to the level of the human soul, and didn't eliminate ego. So now the ego is using this Bodhisattva body, and then the divine soul never falls. The soul that's above it never falls, so only below it. And that was that story. If you remember Andremelech, it was when we were doing the invocations, and it was kind of tricky. Conjurations. So we have to get rid of anger, the lust, the greed, the pride, envy, sloth, gluttony. All those are the seven. That's a 7-headed dragon, right? And then they all have many offshoots, and they're all tangled up within each other. Each time a psychic aggregate is eliminated, like each time this is an ego. You've heard all the terms for egos, right? They use a million of them: psychic aggregates and undesirable defects. But every time a psychic aggregate is eliminated, a virtue crystallizes. One that eliminates the ego of hatred crystallizes the virtue of love. One that eliminates the ego of pride crystallizes the virtue of humbleness. One that eliminates the ego of selfishness crystallizes the virtue of altruism. So we see once we start eliminating these parts, it's good to think of it as like eliminating these evil things, but we're really incarnating these higher things. That this evil thing was in its place taking its power. The virtues slowly begin to crystallize within the essence as it becomes liberated. So the idea is we eliminate an ego and free some essence. And these virtues start to crystallize within the essence. So the more that's unbottled, the more virtue that can crystallize within it. Little by little, we begin to crystallize the soul. The soul becomes crystallized by the essence. Just as water is crystallized into ice, so too does essence crystallize into soul. This is why you need to do the psychological work. This is the most important work that we have to do right now. Essence is a fraction of the soul, right? This essence we have is a small fraction of the soul. So the more we free, the more of it we have, the more of it can crystallize actual soul. As it is liberated, more and more soul is crystallized within it. This is why essence is the necessary psychic material needed to incarnate the soul. So you can kind of see how that would work. And then with alchemy, it creates the solar bodies and all of this thing. And it's kind of you need them both. But most importantly, right now is to work on psychology. The most important thing is the 3 factors, right? Everybody remembers that, right? The birth, the death, and the sacrifice. No matter what we do, that's the most important thing that he always teaches us. So the death is a big part of that. Alchemy helps with the death, but if you don't have a partner, you still have the work. There's still work you can do. There's a lot of work you can do. And with alchemy, it can become faster in some areas because you're getting more energy now, but really it all starts with the individual first, even before you want to go to advanced practices like alchemy.
Well, I was going to say partners come and go. People die.
Yes.
So
Exactly. No, exactly. And it's not. And the crux of the work isn't on that part. The crux of the work is on this part, the internal psychology. And once you start eliminating egos, right, and becoming more in touch with the soul and crystallizing that, you can say the divine being will put you on the right path. Your being is in secret. The way I see it, when it's time for you to do this certain thing, the situation will appear or will bring itself forward. But most of us, we have to start working on the psychology first. It has to be done first because most of our problems are psychological. Yeah. And even with working with the alchemy, we'd mostly be working on the psychology of the individual psychology of ourselves first. I mean, it has 2 effects, right? You can eliminate ego with it, and you can create solar bodies. Eliminating ego is more important right now, if you ask me. But Samael in his later books talked a lot about the psychological work being most important because we're so far away from the spiritual right now that the idea is we have to start cleaning out our minds, cleaning out the egos. That's what we have to do first. And there's a lot of work that we can all be doing on that. So he was really adamant in his later works. He'd have specific questions from his students. They'd talk to him and they'd say, how can I find more peace? He's like, okay, what ego are you working on right now? Not one in particular. Well, you have to be working on an ego in particular right now. That's what you're doing. You have to observe yourself. You have to find an ego, and you have to start working on those egos. And he'd be very blunt that way. He'd ask them, he'd say, well, I want to incarnate my higher self, but I'm having trouble. What should I do? Which ego are you working on? Oh, I don't have one in mind right now. You have to have one in mind. You have to be working right now. He was really adamant in a lot of his books. You have to be working right now. And a lot of his meditations were on, okay, everybody find the ego that you're working with, and now we're going to meditate, and we're going to meditate on those egos. And they do a lot of self-reflection kind of meditations, a lot of that stuff. So in his mind, his later books on the psychology were some of the most important ones he wrote, because it's the ones that we need the most. The other ones are true, and all that stuff is well and good, and knowing all the tree of life and all that stuff is good, but you have to start with the psychology. You got to start cleaning out the barn first, or else it's going to be all for naught, basically. Which we can all do, a little bit at a time. It's not overwhelming. We can do it without feeding your egos. You can all do it. So this is in review now. We must react to the situations of life with awareness. Remember, we talked about awareness. That's the highest state of reaction. It's above the mechanical emotions and the calculating intellect. Awareness cultivates the inner mind. They're pretty much products of each other. Imagination, inspiration, and intuition lead to the development of the inner mind. These steps. And apparently they'll come one after another. You start working on your imagination, you start imagining these things, and then you'll have an experience that inspires you, then you get inspired. And then the experiences become more real, and then it's more of an intuition. And intuition is kind of like the process of the inner mind. You're not thinking thoughts now because it's above the intellect. It's intuition. It's direct experience, direct knowledge. And the inner mind is the instrument of the being. That's why the inner mind has to be cultivated.
So you start imagining what, like
Well, we'll talk about it in our next lecture. But even the idea, like when you start imagining, the idea of going back in your day and observing what egos, trying to remember which egos, you're consciously using your imagination now to start seeing the pictures of your day.
Yes.
And what the ego popped up and what it looked like and what it caused you to do and what effect it had on other people. That's a conscious use of the imagination.
Okay.
That's how we use it. The inner mind leads to the direct experience of truth. With experience, authentic faith is born within us, because now we know faith is like the child of truth. You don't have to believe in something. If you experience it, you can have faith in it. In order to develop the inner mind, we must comprehend the mind on all its levels. 49 levels of the mind, I believe it was. So subconscious and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot. That includes the subconscious. We must eliminate the psychological aggregates, the egos. We have to eliminate the egos. That's the death. That's the death. Death, birth, sacrifice, that's the death. The mind must be made receptive and passive in order to be used as an instrument of the being. If there's egos in there agitating your mind and using you for other things, you're never going to be in connection with your higher being. It's always going to be a disconnect there because you're not going to receive that telegram. When the egos are eliminated, essence is freed. So as we eliminate these egos, we start to free more and more essence, more and more consciousness. Essence is a fraction of that which is called soul. When we destroy vice, we cultivate virtue. So by destroying the egos, we start cultivating the flip side of it, as we talked about. The essence that slowly accumulates little by little begins to crystallize that which is called soul. So the more essence is freed, the more soul can begin to become crystallized. And it's a slow, slow process too. So that's why you have to work, continually work and work and work at it. The more essence that is freed, the more soul becomes crystallized. So the more of our essence that we have taking over our consciousness, the more we'll be able to understand, and the more we'll be able to perceive from the being, and it'll become, I don't know if it'll become easier, but it'll be on a different level of consciousness. We'll be understanding more things that we don't understand now. Soul crystallizes in the essence. The essence must be freed from the egos. The egos must be eliminated from the mind. That's kind of the real synthesis of what we said tonight here, basically. Question? No. So you can see that it's not like we're not eliminating the mind. We're eliminating the defects from the mind so that the mind can be used by the being. The being can use the mind. Once we start crystallizing the soul, then we can attain this higher being. And that's basically what this entire lecture has been about. Is there any questions? I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Free your mind, the end. Free bird coming through. Look out.
what was that guy's name you mentioned?
The guy I mentioned was, his name was Rudolf Steiner.
Oh, Rudolph.
I don't talk too much about other teachers, but Samael does talk